So we are now in public session. So I'd like to welcome the following witnesses from PwC to the meeting to discuss the National Broadband Plan. We have Ms Amy Ball, Partner Advisory Consulting, Ms Fiona Smith, Directory Advisory Practice, and Dr Luke Redmond, a Senior Economist Advisory Strategy Team. So before we begin, I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that by virtue of Section 17(2)(l) of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of their evidence to this committee. However, if you're directed by the Chairman to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you're entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You're directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you're asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you should not criticise or make charges against any person, persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable. I also wish to advise you that any submission or opening statements that you've made to the committee will be published on the committee website after this meeting. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that they should not comment on, criticise or make charges against any person or persons outside the House or an official either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. And I just remind members and witnesses to turn off your mobile phones or to switch them onto flight mode as they interfere with the sound system. So I'll start by asking Ms Ball to give your opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. We welcome the opportunity to attend the session today to discuss our role in the cost-benefit analysis and the benefits report in relation to the National Broadband Plan. Your investigation has particular interest in the following three themes. Firstly, the rollout time. Secondly, value for money, including the cost-benefit analysis. And thirdly, ownership. And for today, we will be providing input on the cost-benefit analysis element of the second theme only, given our limited scope. I will start with a brief introduction. My name is Amy Ball and I'm a partner in the PwC advisory practice, leading the technology, information, communication and entertainment practice. I have over 25 years of experience, having spent 15 years of that time working as a senior executive in both the telecommunications and technology sectors prior to joining PwC in 2012. I am the lead partner on the cost-benefit analysis, or the CBA advice, provided by PwC in relation to the NBP. I'm joined by my colleagues Fiona Smith, a director in our corporate finance practice, and also by Dr Luke Redmond, an economist in our consulting team. Together, we have extensive experience of delivering similar services across the public and private sector. PwC was appointed in January 2015 following a competitive tendering process as strategic advisors on the National Broadband Plan, including assisting with the CBA as set out below. We were commissioned to complete a CBA on behalf of the Department of Communications, Climate Action and the Environment. The objective of the CBA is to assess the extent to which a state intervention to support the attainment of the primary National Broadband Plan objective of universal next generation access will yield a positive return to Irish society. The CBA was prepared as part of a wider NBP project, which included a technical design and planning workstream, Analysis Mason-led, a financial appraisal and procurement workstream, KPMG-led, including value for money, ownership and cost model, and an NBP strategy workstream, PwC-led, which includes the CBA. The team described above led the CBA, which falls within the scope of this committee session today. Separate aspects of our work were performed by international experts from other PwC offices, with the UK firm of PwC responsible for the strategic advice and PwC Netherlands responsible for state aid advice. So, under the cost-benefit analysis, or the CBA, all public projects over €20 million are required to complete a CBA in accordance with the Public Spending Code. Our work on the CBA was completed over a 4-year period with numerous iterations, with the final CBA published in May 2019. The technical option, as advised to us by the technical project advisors, Analysis Mason, is for 100% fibre to the premise. They concluded that this technology was the optimal solution for the delivery of the NBP objective of universal next-generation access broadband in the intervention area. Therefore, this technical option forms the basis of the CBA assessment. However, the Department advised us that they reserved the option to change the technical solution on a case-by-case basis during deployment, where it makes technical and commercial sense to do so during the build period. KPMG was responsible for developing the cost model, taking into consideration the final bidder costs and assumed take-up over the duration of the contract. This cost forms the basis of the cost element of the CBA. Each of the work streams operated independently, and no one team had visibility of the detailed calculations of each of the constituent parts. At no point did any change to the costs influence the benefits case, as both were prepared on a standalone basis by different parties. The basis of the benefits compilation remained consistent throughout an iterative process over the 4-year period, but was updated for new data points, including, for example, changes to demographics, reductions of households in the intervention area, and change in economic parameters. We adopted a conservative approach to the evaluation of benefits throughout. Additional adjustments were agreed at formal review stage with DEPR in response to debate on certain subjective matters. And as the Public Spending Code is not exact and requires an element of judgment in its application, the debate related to certain assumptions which were based on domestic data and international research. We evaluated DEPR's queries and adjusted the CBA consistent with our conservative approach to benefit evaluation and in light of expected updates on the Public Spending Code. Our CBA is and always has been positive relative to the costs and benefits at each iteration. We ran 3 different scenarios in our CBA. All scenarios resulted in a positive benefit to the cost ratio, which we refer to as BCR, over the 25-year period, with a central scenario resulting in a BCR of 1.3 to 1. In accordance with the Public Spending Code, the only benefits included in the CBA are those that have empirical evidence available to substantiate them. The benefits we have qualified as part of the CBA work are classified into 2 categories: residential, which are 2.2 billion in the central scenario, and enterprise, which are 1.5 billion in the central scenario. Residential benefits within the CBA analysis include bundled communications, realised savings available by purchasing communication bundles, service waiting, reduced time required for value-adding online activity to be completed, remote working, time and cost savings for white-collar workers being able to work remotely, and transaction savings, the time and cost savings from online shopping. The CBA analysis identifies enterprise benefits totalling 1.5 billion to farm and non-farm enterprises in the intervention area and non-intervention area enterprises, and from additional job creation or employment benefits for enterprises within the intervention area. Given that it is not possible to quantify a significant number of benefits in relation to the National Broadband Plan due to the lack of available empirical evidence, we were asked by the Department to perform a separate piece of work on the qualitative benefits, which was completed in August 2018 and published by the Department in May 2019. The objective of this report was to outline any additional benefits deemed to be non-quantifiable that could complement the quantifiable benefits outlined in the CBA model. Such benefits include e-health, e-education, social inclusion, rural development, tourism and climate change. The approach and content of this report consists of desk-based research to support each of the qualitative benefits and interviews and case studies with individuals and businesses both inside and outside the intervention area. I thank the committee for the opportunity to appear today and to make this statement. We are happy to take questions members may have relating to the advice we provided on the CBA for the National Broadband Plan.
Thank you very much. And I have just 2 brief questions for you. Just one in relation to the cost-benefit analysis. Could you explain to people listening and maybe tuning into this here this afternoon, in layman's terms, what the monetary return the state will get from this rollout as opposed to the cost of it? You're saying that all the scenarios you looked at resulted in a positive benefit to cost ratio. Just if you could expand on that. And then the second part of your work in relation to the non-quantifiable benefits of the rollout, like e-health and e-education, just to expand on your work in relation to those 2 areas for people listening. Just, I know it's some
That's
of the
absolutely fine. It is a complex project.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So to address your first question, Chair, overall, as we said, the CBA or the BCR ratio is 1.3 to 1, which means benefits are 1.3 times of costs. So the total benefits were 3.8 billion over the cost for 3 billion in the final output. Within that, I'll ask my colleague Fiona to go through the detail just to bring it to life a little bit more for you.
Yeah,
And I'm happy to go into the non-quantifiable afterwards.
Thank you.
So I'll just talk about breaking it down to actual numbers. So when I'm talking about when we built the benefits, we assumed there's certain data points that are relevant. The first thing being the number of households we're talking about here are 387,000 households. We're talking about 100,000 businesses, of which 56,000 are farms and 44,000 are non-farms, being smaller SMEs. And we're talking about 147,000 white-collar workers living in the intervention area. Now, it's important to think about these numbers in the context of the benefits that I'm going to outline. So, as Ms Ball said, we quantified two benefits, being residential benefits and enterprise. So we look firstly at residential benefits. We categorise that into four key components. The first one being remote working. We quantified that the annual savings for a household would be €81 to benefit by remote working. So there is a study out there that says about 4% of people work from at home. Now, that in today's terms we considered very conservative. There's recent studies from the IDA that say that's up at 10%, and there's even more recent again that says that should be 14%. So when Ms Ball mentioned that we were conservative, there's an example of where we were. But as I'm saying, in relation to remote working, it's about the savings. If I was travelling from Milltown outside Ennis and I travelled into for my job in Limerick, that's a round trip about 80 kilometres, and it's the savings from a fuel point of view and from the time spent that I will be in the car travelling that we've quantified in that particular benefit. The next one then that we have quantified is what we called reduced service waiting time. So we've classed that the annual saving for a household would be about €500. And here we're talking about the kind of services we're talking about would be e-government services, motor tax, that you, be it driver licence application, your NCT, passport applications, or even video conference that you can do instead of the face-to-face meetings. It's the benefits of that. And how that's calculated is based on what is the average adult weekly time on the internet, and we have assumed 8.7 hours for that, and then we have assumed again that 25% of that time is productive, and that's how we've come up with the calculation of €500 per household per annum. And the next one is what we call bundled communication, and that's easy enough to understand. If you there's many service providers out there that offer a complete package that's quad play. You effectively buy your phone, you buy your mobile, your TV and your broadband in one package, and there's obviously a discount of buying a bundled package like that. In this case, we're coming up with an annual saving in the household of about €31. Again, we've tried to be conservative here. We've only applied that to 19% of the people in the intervention area, because we all know everybody is slow to change and like to kind of, there's a lot of inertia about these kind of things, and as well in some of these areas they might not be paying for the TV service. So that's the third one. The final one in residential areas is really around, it's about transaction savings around online shopping, and we're assuming in that case that there's about €120 annual savings in a household. So that's the residential benefits category. Moving on then to the enterprise benefits. So the first one here we looked at is farm enterprises. So we're looking at the improvement in the gross value add by virtue of this particular benefit. And in the case of farm enterprises, we have assumed about €492 in this case. Now, as I said again, we are talking about in the intervention area there's 56,000 farms. We have been conservative here, because we have only applied it to 20% of the farms in the intervention area, because we realise that the kind of savings we're talking about here will require some investment, and it will really only apply to medium and large sized farms. The kind of savings we're talking about here is around animal health in terms of monitoring the animal, calf mortality, online applications. Everything now is in e-government relates to that, and it's the kind of savings that you would expect to have in a farm enterprise in relation to having access to high-speed broadband. I would say in this particular area, if you see in our benefits report, there's a whole raft of developments in farm technology and the kind of ways that you can run a business in a farm, be it around energy efficiency, how you manage your crop, data on soil fertility, monitoring the animals and their welfare and their health. There's just a whole raft of technology that has been developed, and we would say it's an early development, but more importantly, as far as farm enterprises are concerned, it's in early adoption stage, so therefore we have not classed included anything in the benefits for things like that, but you would expect over the next 25 years there would be a significant growth in that area. The next one then we have is our non-farm enterprises, being the small and medium-sized businesses employing less than 50 people in the intervention area, and we've calculated a benefit here of about 1,200 per enterprise, an improvement in the GVA for the business per annum. So that's pretty much the kind of savings you would expect. You're on 24/7, you've access to more customers by virtue of that, you can increase your revenue. If you think about things, the kind of costs for a business, you reduce marketing costs by virtue of previously you might have had to do mail drops, now you're doing everything electronically. And then if you look at the kind of savings there can be around IT in terms of cloud computing. So we'd expect a saving of about 1,200 there in relation to the GVA. The next one then is the fact that, as I said, 147,000 people, white-collar workers, work outside of the intervention area, and they're travelling from Rathdowney up to Naas for their job, and there is obviously a benefit to their business in Naas, the fact that they can work remotely. So what we've done here is, again, we use the same statistic for the business, it's 4% for remote working, and we have assumed, based on a significant amount of studies that say that you can increase productivity for those businesses by about 35%, and that's resulting in just under 1,100 improvement in the GVAs for those businesses. The final one is in relation to employment, and we have assumed an uplift of employment in the GVA for these businesses of around just over 200, about 212. Now, I would say in relation to all these benefits, as Ms. Ball said, we only include them if there's empirical evidence to say we can justify it and also can quantify it, and equally as important, they all comply with the public spending code in terms of what should and should be not included in a CBA of this nature. I should say two final points in relation to this. We have applied a displacement factor in the enterprise benefits, which effectively, is another haircut in order to reduce the benefits in order to reflect the economic factors that might apply at the time. So again, we have been conservative in our approach.
Okay. And did you want to do something in the non-quantifiable?
If you're happy.
Yeah, thank you.
So as Ms. Smith and myself mentioned in the opening statement, so in the absence of empirical evidence under the public spending code, we can't actually put a quantifiable benefit within the CBA. So as such, we commissioned research, we examined case studies, we conducted interviews, and we consulted with enterprise bodies in order to assess what the opportunities were for benefits beyond the scope of the quantitative benefits, and they cross a range of areas and sectors. So if I just go through them at a high level, and please feel free to interrupt me if you need to get some more clarification. But in terms of education, so there's a huge benefit attached to all schools having reliable access to technology. Some of the schools that we spoke with mentioned that most of their courses were now coming through an online format, and that the children were expected to complete their homework online at home. But one of the problems they're having in the rural areas is that they don't have consistent, resilient broadband available to them at all time. Thinking about health and the ability of monitoring patients in remote areas, and people not having to travel to GPs or to hospitals on every occasion. This can help ensure that older people have the ability to live at home for longer periods of time. Social inclusion, so even the ability to interact online, community forums, even with Skype, FaceTime, being able to communicate with family who aren't local, who may even be abroad, we would say has a fantastic benefit in terms of mental health, keeping in contact with people, just solidifying that social inclusion. And we're seeing huge movements there in terms of some proof of concepts, which are no doubt will become more and more prevalent over the next 25 years, that will have a huge impact on people's mental health and well-being. Tourism, given that many of our prime tourist spots are in the remote areas of the country, if I think about the Wild Atlantic Way, it's very important that businesses or start-up enterprises in those areas, hotels, tourism bodies, have access to broadband in order to be able to maintain an online presence, to promote the areas and the activities that are available to tourists, and to develop small businesses around each of those areas. I spent quite a lot of time in Mayo actually, and the local surf company would say that their broadband is always falling over and they've missed out on mass bookings, and they would definitely value, always on broadband. Thinking about the environment then, that's obviously a very topical area for Ireland in general and for global. And we have looked at the reduced emissions that are obviously relating to reduced commuting times. I spend a lot of time over in Silicon Valley, and I'm amazed at the prevalence of driverless cars. So they are definitely coming our way, if not in the next year or two, but certainly over the next 5 to 25 years. We would see always-on broadband as being a key enabler to online access for cars, for smart motoring, for smart trafficking, and essentially to encourage the use of electrified vehicles, reduce emissions. The smart home experience, I don't know if any of you have Alexa, but it is, we don't, but I would say that it's something that we talk about the rise of the Internet of Things. So in the future, all of our home appliances will be connected to the Internet. And I have seen a fridge that will automate your order if your milk is running out. But not only that, in the broader context, if you think about smart metering, smart home monitoring for businesses and for homes alike, broadband is a key enabler for that, and in the absence of it, it's just not possible. But yes, technology is moving at pace, and the pace of growth of data is incredible. We've done a recent study which hasn't been published yet, but we're seeing the rise of data going at 25% year on year over the next 5 years for Europe alone. And with that data comes a need for better transmission networks, faster speeds, greater resiliency across networks.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move to my colleague's Deputy, Timmy Dooley.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your presentation and your answers. Which kind of accept that cost-benefit analysis in relation to some issues is quite difficult to perform because of the subjective nature of the benefits. The costs are always clear, but the benefits are somewhat subjective, notwithstanding the public spending code. And here's an example of that, I would have thought, where you're looking at the potential for the future. Sometimes it's difficult to get a mathematical equation that covers the future potential, and therefore to some extent this probably, in my view, probably is not a great example of the best use of a cost-benefit analysis, notwithstanding that it's required by the state. And certainly from my perspective, the need is obvious, the potential is obvious, and just trying to get a mathematical equation to support that is not always easy when you're at the early stages, to some extent, of such future potential. But notwithstanding that, a lot has been made of it. Some of the documents that were released, particularly the one from Deeper, there were issues around, and you'll have read some of the comments, so I'll just give you an opportunity to maybe provide us with some information on it. This idea that some benefits were identified at a later stage, and then that corresponded with additional costs. Maybe you just talk to that for us for a second. And then I kind of want to move on from that then to the area of ownership, the gap funding model. Well, Sino didn't fall within your area of expertise. The PwC did a report at a point on the ownership model. So maybe if you answer the first one, then we'll go back we'll move then to the ownership piece.
Okay, so I'll address the first question. So yes, when we're looking at a CBA of this nature in the context of a 25-year programme of spend and of benefits, it is certainly something which relies on detailed empirical evidence and very, very strong assessment of any of the underlying economic assumptions that would drive the benefit delivery. So with that in mind, if I look at the composition of the team, we've had very strong expertise across the team, including economics, corporate finance, accounting, international expertise in terms of thought leadership. We've had extensive liaison with the network, and we've examined extensive literature and research. So our methodology, our process has been very robust. Looking at the components of the CBA, there's been very robust governance around each component. So if I split the CBA into three parts, you've got the cost model, which the cost model was tendered for separately, so a separate group of advisors prepared the cost under strict protocols. Again, the technical solution was tendered under a separate tender, and again, prepared under strict protocols, and then the benefits won by ourselves and delivered by ourselves. And I suppose it's at the CBA point where each of those three constructs come together into one formula. And as part of that, we're happy with our methodology. When we looked at the public spending code, some of the directions are not always clear and specific in the context of, for example, certain economic drivers. So in that case, we would have taken a view in terms of our knowledge of international precedents and applying our assessment to domestic data. So as we were running through the CBA, which would have started back in 2015, we ran a very collaborative process with IGES, who are, as you know, the economic unit of DEEPR. And back in 2015, we underwent an extensive review of the CBA, which essentially has not changed in terms of the format, the content. There may have been some changes to data and to certain costs along the way. However, the construct was essentially the same from 2015. So back in 2015, we had a very positive interaction with IGES. Any queries were addressed very quickly, and there were no outstanding issues or concerns that needed to be remedied. Following that, as I said, there were other iterations to the CBA because it was a working document or a working model. We then met with IGES in June of 2018 and went through another review of the CBA, and at that point we shared the CBA report and the detailed model along with all of the assumptions underpinning the model. So we then had a back and forth engagement with IGES probably for another 7 months, and over the course of that period additional queries, points of clarification were raised, which we again addressed, and this culminated in a final meeting with IGES and the SecGen of DEEPR in December of 2018. And during that meeting, a new member of IGES who had just joined raised some fresh concerns or challenges in relation to the formulation of the CBA. As I said, given the lengthy duration of this in terms of a 25-year forecast of the future and predicated on taking an economic interpretation of some of the guidelines within the Public Service Spending Code, we did have a good debate. We had certainly there were particular areas of concern raised by IGES during the meeting. One was around the inclusion of e-health, which we had included both costs and benefits for, as we believe there was a very robust case to do so. Their view was that actually under the PSC it was probably more conservative to remove it on the basis that a separate investment case would be required for that. So we did accept that and we reverted. The other main issues related to the gross value added, or GVA, and displacement factors which we applied to the CBA. So we took those away. As I said, we relied upon international evidence and our assessment of domestic data to align on certain elements that would support our GVA and displacement factors application within the CBA. And I will ask Dr. Redmond to reflect on this a little bit more, given that he is the economist in the room. But we did meet with IGES at a later point in January, where we discussed and debated those issues. We accepted some of the challenge, but we did align on specific numbers which we would include in the CBA, which did reduce the net benefits ultimately. So following this, we didn't receive any formal communication from DEPR, and typically that communication would have gone to the department, and again we didn't hear anything to reflect any issues or concerns which might have arisen. So I go back to your point, Deputy, in terms of the costs and the benefits. As I said, there were very separated work streams working in silos. Both were working to different timelines, so the benefits would have been adjusted in February of 2019, and then the costs would have been changed in March 2019 once the final bidder costs were through.
Okay.
So hopefully that answers your question on this.
Yeah, I guess, because I mean, it's just that issue that arose where, you know, there was a charge made against the CBA that it wasn't credible. So you've addressed that. So that's just important that we get that kind of.
And just to be clear, we're very confident that the CBA is credible and applies to the public spending code.
I'd expect you would. Just on the ownership piece, and again, it may be something that you're not able to get into because it's not your area. But if there's questions here that you're not in a position to answer, maybe you can get the relevant group within to provide the answers to us at a later stage. But it's just about the ownership. The ownership model that was followed, this gap funding model, and I know you did some piece of work on the broadband strategy for Ireland at a point, and you looked at the various different ownership models, and like others you identified as the gap funding model has been potentially the best route to go for a whole lot of reasons which you set out, and they're well documented, they're in the documentation that we've been provided with. Would you accept though that as the tendering process, as the procurement process moved on, and effectively CSIRO, the ESB and Vodafone as a consortium, and they are pulling out, that a lot of the benefits that were attached to that thinking at the time that supported the gap funding model, would you accept that effectively those were no longer reasons to continue with the gap funding model? Would you accept effectively that the case for the gap funding model was weakened significantly by the exit of CSIRO and AIR?
So, Deputy, as you mentioned, it's beyond the scope of the CBA review, and I would say that I'm not in a position to comment on developments since we completed that work back in spring of 2016. I accept that the world moved on and the competitive landscape changed, but we haven't been involved in any subsequent evaluation. So. Okay.
Well, maybe the people, and maybe this is something you can provide to us, the team, I think you said a team from the UK,
from the UK and,
had advised in this area. Maybe they could give a view which might make its way to the committee in due course. Because that's really the big issue for us, I suppose, in trying to get to where we need to get to, is just why are we still, for us, these are the questions we have, and I know you're not going to be able to answer. Why are we still proceeding with a gap funding model when effectively the state is taking on so much of the risk? The notion of the competitive tensions that would be there between the big operators and their existing infrastructure was no longer part of the final process. We discovered yesterday from Analysis Mason that in effect the current bidder is now going to build over the existing network that AIR have, that 300,000 homes and businesses that have been passed. We're now going to have another overlay of that, which raises a lot of concerns for us in terms of cost and time frame. So those are issues we have to address, and I accept that your division is not in a position to answer that, but it may be something that another division within PwC might provide us with some information on or a view on, based on the question.
Well, I would say in response to that, Deputy, that so the work that was done in terms of the strategy piece was completed in spring of 2016, and yes, that did cover 5 different options on the controllership model, and this was in liaison with another group of advisors, and we concurred with their recommendation in terms of the gap funding model. Since then, the other group of advisors took on the responsibility of final recommendation on the ownership model, which would have been included in the published report in 2018. So on that basis, PwC wouldn't be in a position to take a comment.
What is that other team of advisors? Is that KPMG, is it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I understand that, yeah. No, I'm fine with that,
Okay, thank you. Deputy Brian Stanley.
Thanks, Carlock, and just welcome the panel from PwC. Yeah, just in relation to the cost, in your opening statement, where you referred to the fact that it should be, the benefit should be 1.3 of the cost. We now learn the overall cost of the project is in the region of 5 billion, according to what the department and ministers have been telling us in the past few weeks. It's in the region of 5 billion, 2.95 of subsidy, and roughly 2 billion on top of that. And just on your analysis, that would seem to fall a long way short of the 1.3. It would actually show that it wasn't even reaching break even. And just when you were going through the different benefits, you mentioned the word assumed in relation to each one. That PwC assumed. Use that word in each of the areas that you looked at. And I just would have concern about that. That, you know, how firm was all of that, Amy.
Okay.
And just as well in relation to the cost-benefit analysis, there have been a number of senior officials senior department officials expressed concerns that the PwC report had a series of flaws in it and inaccurate financial information. And if you look at, for example, the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, the Secretary General of that department, he sent a letter to the Minister, and in that he outlined, and I quote, that is flawed and the project does not represent value for money on any rigorous or objective basis, unquote. And we then find out through a further letter from the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform to the Minister that the value for money assessment that they said that had consistently overestimated the cost to the private operator by 1 billion. And that error was only discovered in April of this year. I would just like to deal with those two issues. And they went on to question whether or not the cost-benefit analysis was in any way consistent with the public spending code. Just those couple of issues first.
Okay. So, Deputy, I'll start with your original statement on the cost relative to the benefits. So in our model, the differences would relate to discount factors and internal rates of return. We are looking at the same baselines as the department, so we are consistent with that, and our client is very comfortable that we're using the right numbers in our published business case, our CBA. On the second point around the assumed benefits, as we talk through benefits and we look at them over a 25-year term, economic assumptions need to be made. Forecasts by their very nature can be subjective, and that is why this very good governance process is in place with DEEPR and the Public Spending Code, where there's very strong and robust evaluation of any cost-benefit analysis cases. So as such, I would be very comfortable in saying that our assumptions are very well grounded in empirical research. They've been evaluated by very qualified people. We've referred to very similar case studies across other countries, and we've also adopted a very conservative approach. And we have some very specific instances where we can show that actually we pared back benefits where we felt that, as you say, this is an assumption-based process. So we wanted to make sure that we didn't overstate benefits in any way. You mentioned the perceived flaw in the information. So in response to that, I would like to remind you to the response I gave to Deputy Dooley, where I went through the process of the creation of the CBA, where the costs were coming from another source. There was very strong programme governance in place through the department. We were in constant communication with the department. This is a very complex programme. Costs were moving as the new bidder costs were coming through. There was a difference in costs in terms of the exclusion or inclusion of certain operator costs. Other costs which were moving were the contingencies. So when the error was identified, the proper checks and balances kicked in, and the error was communicated to us. We promptly remedied it within our CBA.
Well, could I just ask that the most senior official in that department, very experienced official, with years of experience, he was very definite about this. He said that it didn't say that it may not represent. He said does not represent value for money. And just the other thing that I point out to you that the cost to the private operator, in other words, what's going to cost them, the fact that it was overestimated by 1 billion. It's not as if it is 10 million or 20 million. This is 1,000 million euros. At 1,000 million euros, on a project that we were told only a couple of years ago that the whole cost of it was going to be somewhere between 1 and 2 billion. And that the taxpayers' contribution would be 0.5 of a billion, or maybe somewhere shy of a billion. That the overestimation is 1,000 billion euros, and that was only discovered in April of this year. Literally, as this project has been run on, that to me, as a layperson looking at it, would, I mean, if that would have red lights flashing all over the place for me. And for the public, I mean, there is really, really huge concerns around this. The overall cost, the discrepancies, the changes in cost, the changes in what the private operator is contributing. And I don't, like PwC, you're a long-established company and reputable company, but this stuff is, like, you're so far wide of the mark in so many different areas, and the whole basis of this contract, the way that it kept changing, it's absolutely, looking at it, that any careful look, or any of us that have been following this for a period of time, it has literally changed and twisted and turned so many times, and costs and figures have changed. But 1,000 million euros, and this is only discovered this April, I find that astonishing. Surely would you not have concerns about that?
So, Deputy, you've mentioned the changing costs, and you've mentioned the value for money. Both of those areas were not within the scope of the PwC engagement. Both of those areas within the other advisors. I'm sorry, yes.
But you're looking after value for money.
We're looking at the CBA.
Yeah, cost-benefit analysis.
The benefits.
That's said to me.
Yeah.
Cost-benefit analysis.
But there is a separate stream entitled
value for money, including cost-benefit analysis.
No, and in my opening statement, I said that we would speak to the CBA element, which is not part of the value for money. That was the scope of this committee, or the Oireachtas committee, and I was just ring-fencing our role within that.
Okay.
So we are not responsible for value for money.
You just move on. Just go. And
sure.
Your fee was 2.4 million.
That was, we were paid, including VAT. Yes.
Okay.
And we were paid 600 million for the CBA.
And just a question I want to ask you, specifically in relation to
yes, apologies.
Specifically in relation to the cost-benefit analysis, you concluded that the cost of the private operator was going to be 974 million then, okay? And now we know not only that the nature of that of the consortium has changed, and the funding, and we're now relying on a letter apparently that has been handed to the department, which says that that there's an investor after being found that's good for 180 million, and that the main bidder in the consortium, the financier Granite and McCord, has now to come up with in the region of 40 million to bring us to 220 million. Have you concerns about that issue? The fact that or can you explain why the cost-benefit analysis concluded that the operator was going to put in 974 million, and now we know that the total, including the letter that came in from an investor that's going to throw in their lot with Grannon and McCord is now in the region of 200 million, 220 million. Can you explain that discrepancy?
So that was, Deputy, that was not part of our remit. So that was coming from another set of advisors. So I am not privy to all of the details, all of the communication that would have been undertaken. We weren't commissioned to evaluate that, so I'm really not in a position to comment on it, I'm afraid.
Okay, we'll move on. Just in relation to your final cost-benefit analysis submission to the Department, and you stated that, and I quote, "The costs to the state have also increased as the subsidy is now more front-loaded." And that for sure it is. You know, the first sight we had of any of this is about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And it certainly is, the taxpayers' contribution is front-loaded, and the taxpayers coughing up a lot of money and fairly quickly. And just wondering, have you factored into your cost-benefit analysis the potential risk or the potential for losses to the state that they could incur if the project didn't work out as planned, and that the taxpayer, as opposed to the investor, would carry that risk in the early years?
So, Deputy, I'll respond on 2 fronts. So your first point was around the subsidy and it being front-loaded. I just want to restate that the subsidy forms part of the cost workstream, and the timing of the take-up would influence the subsidy, and the timing of the take-up came from another workstream. So I'm not in a position to comment on the subsidy. On the risk, we did run some risk scenarios within our CBA, which is in compliance with the Public Spending Code, and we have taken, we went through that risk assessment with IGES, and we were comfortable that we had covered each of the risks outlined that we had agreed with IGES.
Okay. Just in relation to the cost-benefit analysis, and in relation to the fact that a whole new network is being built, I expressed concerns on the day of the announcement of the fact that AIR was going to hive off 300,000 households and premises. Now turned out to be 340 to 350,000 out of the 840,000 in the intervention area. And we now discover, I expressed concerns at that time that was basically going to banjax the whole project, because you were taking out the rich pickings and you were being left with the hardest to reach ones, which would be more costly and everything like that. And we got confirmation of those concerns that have been expressed from that day in March, I think it was 2017, the day of the press conference at the announcement, that has actually happened. And a whole infrastructure has to be now rolled out side by side with in the areas that AIR have taken up, which is the richest pickings. It's where the clusters of houses are, and the harder to reach ones are beyond that. And as I said at the time, they've effectively donutted the residential areas, and you have to build an infrastructure now to get past that. And then the poles had to be leased to get the rest of the way. And I just wanted to ask you in relation to cost and benefit, would you have concerns about the fact that the state and the taxpayer is now getting ready to hand over just short of €1 billion, we're told, 900 million, to another company? So NBI, National Broadband Ireland, that company is now, if this goes ahead in its current form, which will have the board will be called NBI, the corporate structure. So that corporate structure will now be getting 0.9 of a billion out of the subsidy from the taxpayer, and will hand that to another private company for permission to hang the cables on their poles, including in the areas they have. And they can't actually supply people within that area. AIR have a veto on that. That's what we were told yesterday by KPMG. So they have to run the cables past all those houses or premises, all of those 340,000, to get to the 490,000 or so that's left, right? And this is the main reason we're told, for the cost escalating. One of the main reasons for the escalation in cost, we're told. Have you a concern about the fact, were you concerned about the fact that we're doing all of that when the state and public, you and me, and the people outside of this room, the 4.7 of us that inhabit this part of the island, already owned an infrastructure, the one that electricity is rolled out on, and that has already been used to carry broadband and telecommunications networks in parts of the country? Have you concerns about that?
So Deputy, if I listen to your concerns, in terms of the CBA, we weren't commissioned to evaluate the bidder or the bidding process. So I can't reflect on your comments on the construct there. In terms of the technology solution, again, that forms part of the technology work stream. And with technology, it's bound to move. We did get involved when Air made the announcement in terms of their increased plans to roll out a further 300,000 homes within the intervention area. And our state aid team, along with ourselves, worked through that in terms of the CBA. And so we did reflect the reduction in terms of the number of households that were going to be covered. We reduced the costs and the benefits accordingly. And we did look at the geo-mapping, and that in turn affected our regional view on certain benefits.
Okay, final question. Just overall with the project, that that if it works out as it's currently designed, and we're looking at 2.995 of a subsidy, and an overall cost, we're told in recent weeks, of in the region of 5 billion overall. And you've said about that you looked at you've used different methods to look at the different areas that would benefit, education and health and so on and so forth. And a lot of it is, you said yourself that a lot of it is assumptions, because you're looking forward and you're saying, and things could change, technology could change, and some of this could be obsolete in a few years' time. Overall, from the point of view of PwC, can you say to the taxpayer that the 2.9, that the figure mentioned only a short number of years ago of 0.5 of a billion, and in 2016, 0.8 of a billion, that has now reached almost 3 billion. Can you say to the Irish taxpayer that you're going to get value for money with this?
So, Deputy, in response to that question, I'd just like to remind you of the benefits that we've gone through. As you said, we have taken assumptions, but they're well-founded in economic theory, robust methodology, strong research, strong validation by subject matter experts. We're very comfortable that the construct and the results in the CBA are strong, and we stand over our work. Yes, the world is changing. If I think back to 25 years ago, none of us had mobile phones. Today, business models are being disrupted due to digital, and digital does rely on broadband and fast generation network access. So as we look into the future over a 25-year period, it's very hard for us to predict what the future landscape looks like. But I would say we took a very conservative approach to our benefits evaluation. So from a benefits perspective, I would say that it is overall positive, and has been with every version that we've run.
Thank you. And finally, Deputy Eamon Ryan.
Paul and Ms Smith and Dr Edmund. Ms Paul, you mentioned there that last meeting with, I think it was the last meeting you said in, was it December or January 2018 or 2019 recently, with the Secretary General of the Department of Public Expenditure Reform and the team from IGES, and that they raised fresh concerns at that. And you mentioned, if I'm recalling right, you said that there are two concerns mainly around gross value added and displacement factors. And I was wondering if you could just give more details that, or you said that maybe Dr Edmund.
I think Dr Edmund is probably the best place to speak to that, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Ryan. So if I start first with the conversation around the gross value add conversation. So the GVA discussion focused on the GVA figure that was used to underpin the productivity and output benefits associated with the white-collar workers who were living in the intervention area but working outside the intervention area. In the updated model, it was originally proposed to use a 2016 GVA figure taken directly from the CSO. However, following conversations with colleagues in Deeper and in view of, I guess, the widespread conversations around kind of the impact of multinationals within the economy, there was an issue raised around kind of whether this 2016 GVA figure actually might be kind of slightly higher and not totally reflective of the productivity levels within the domestic economy. So our discussions with Deeper we agreed a different methodological approach. We said that we would go back to a 2011 GVA figure, and that this GVA figure would then be scaled up by the rate of growth in modified gross national income, or GNI star, over the 2011 to 2016 period. The reason that we went for this approach is that and Deeper had highlighted this, that in view of ongoing changes within national accounting practices, that modified GNI star was produced in order to give a more accurate view of kind of the level of productivity within the economy. So obviously, while multinationals are a very important contributor to the economy, the level of activity they produce here can actually maybe skew our true understanding of the domestic landscape. So when we look at the calculation of GNI, we've GDP component, and then we've net factor income. And the reason I kind of talk about this is that, you know, net factor income takes account of the income that's earned by Irish citizens and companies abroad from economic activity and property that they hold, but also it factors out kind of the income that's earned by foreign-owned companies for economic activity within an Irish context. So GNI is a good figure, but modified GNI was brought in by CSO to take account of the activity of the multinationals, and specifically it takes account of the retained earnings of the redomiciled foreign-owned companies in Ireland, and takes account of the depreciation of foreign-owned capitals on national balance sheets. And what this meant was that when we actually scaled the GVA figure from 2011 to 2016, we saw that the growth rate of GNI star was 39%, whereas across the same period the growth rate in GDP was 61%. So we agreed with colleagues and used the GNI star again to give a more accurate figure, that the productivity figure that we were using across this period. Also, I think it's interesting, and it speaks to my colleagues' points around the conservative approach that we were taking as well. So that when we talk about the productivity benefit that arrives to the white-collar workers living in the intervention area, there was a PwC considered that it might be appropriate to use a GVA figure associated with white-collar workers, the assumption being that these white-collar workers, while living in the intervention area, they're actually travelling to outside the intervention area, they're travelling to large urban areas. They're undertaking work in sectors where you would imagine has a higher value add relative to the national average. So they work in professional services, they work in IT, they work in financial services, etc. And we felt that this average value for white-collar workers would be a good GVA, could potentially be an option. However, on foot of debate with our colleagues in Deeper, which happened on an ongoing basis as a result of the iterative process, it was concluded that the GVA figure that would be used was actually an average national GVA figure, so it included both white-collar workers and blue-collar workers. So the use of a GVA for white-collar workers would have led to a higher productivity uplift for the white-collar workers in the intervention area, but not working there. So the use of the national figure saw a reduction in the GVA. So that was, I guess, just part of the robust approach that we used. The second area where there was discussion was around the concept of displacement. So when a policy intervention is obviously introduced and leads, such as the National Broadband Plan, and it leads to a positive uplift in economic activity or output in one sector of the economy, there is a risk that maybe this leads to a decrease in output in other sectors of the economy. The Public Spending Code indicates that, you know, a CBA needs to provide some sort of estimate or indication of how this displacement effect has been taken account of. Obviously, in conversation with the team in Deeper, you know, they pointed out, and which we agreed with, that, you know, there is a limit to the domestic demand for output, and the argument would exist that any increased output in the economy from the productivity improvements that the NBP could be expected to deliver, will that lead to a fall off in economic activity in other sectors of the economy? So within the CBA, we identify productivity and output improvements occurring at three levels, as my colleagues have said. There's the productivity improvements for white-collar workers living in the intervention area but working outside it. There's the productivity improvement for the farm enterprises, and there's a productivity improvement for the non-farm enterprises. And the way we took account of this within the model is that we applied a displacement factor onto the GVA or output uplift that the MBP would deliver across these sectors. Now, a challenge here, and this is, I guess, part of our robust methodology, is that in an Irish context, there are no Ireland-specific estimates available for kind of output displacement factors. So to apply displacement factors to take account of displacement, we relied on a combination of international empirical research and also an analysis of domestic data. So the UK Government Department for Business Innovation and Skills, now the Business Energy and Industrial Strategy, have produced a research paper on research to assess the improvement of understanding additionality. And this paper provides a range of displacement factors that can be applied to policy interventions across a range of themes and sub-themes and at a range of regional and sub-regional levels. So within the context of the farm and non-farm enterprise benefits, the CBA identifies these benefits emerging at a sub-regional level, and we felt that it was appropriate to utilise displacement factors from the UK government paper at the sub-regional level. Specifically, the NBP can be viewed as, I guess, providing business development competitiveness support to the enterprises within these regions, and that the specific approach is almost an enterprise support. So we applied an associated displacement factor of 16%. Again, this was shared with our colleagues within the DEEPR team. Within the other principal sector, which is where the big driver of productivity benefits relating to the productivity improvement for the white-collar workers, the DEEPR had suggested that we could look at trying to derive a displacement factor on the basis of looking at the volume of national output and identifying the split between the volume of that national output that goes to the domestic market versus the volume that goes to international destinations. Now, an analysis of the CSO data revealed that it was quite difficult to identify that split out. So the approach that we use is that we looked at the total GVA that's produced within the economy. We looked at the split between the volume of that's produced by foreign-owned companies versus domestic-owned, with the assumption being that the volume of domestically produced GVA is for the domestic market. GVA produced by foreign companies would be for export, and that kind of any change in domestic demand for output wouldn't negatively impact that. And that split showed that 60.3% of GVA is produced by foreign-owned companies. So therefore, we applied a displacement factor of 40% to the GVA uplift associated with the white-collar workers. And they were part of the kind of iterative discussions with the team in DEEPR. And that we had previously looked at using a displacement factor for the white-collar workers of 20% based on an analysis of the UK government research, but upon discussion with DEEPR, then we felt that this 40% actually figure was more appropriate, and that was another one of the contributors to the reduction in the benefit calculations.
Okay, so in that last meeting with DEEPR, they kind of came to you and said, we have a concern about gross value added mechanisms and the displacement factors and so on. And then you went away and did further analysis in January, February, was it, and wrote back saying we've adjusted accordingly. Is that a fair reflection? Or?
So we met with IGES and the Secretary of DEEPR in December. We reflected upon their queries, and then we met with them again in January, and there was back and forth through February when it was closed down in February.
I thought Ms. Boyle, you said earlier on that you hadn't heard back from DEEPR after that January meeting. Or?
Our discussion ceased in February.
In February?
Yes.
And so there was a meeting in December with the Secretary General and again a meeting in January with the Secretary General and...
I don't believe the Secretary General was present in the January meeting.
The IGES team met us in January.
Okay. How long was the December meeting? How long did it want?
We were there with the department for probably 2 hours, I would say, yes.
And did the Secretary General raise concerns himself, or was it just this new official in the IGES team?
For the GVA and the displacement, I believe it was the member of the IGES team. Yes.
And then were you satisfied at the end of February? You thought that was all agreed then in terms of the valuation mechanisms or on the benefit side, that DEEPR, your sense was DEEPR had signed off on it, was it?
Well, typically DEEPR would sign off on the CBA with the department, and in the absence of any notification to the contrary, we've been working on the assumption that it's been fine, because the department have not flagged any issues or concerns to us.
So was the final communication in February, was that a phone call or was it letters, or what was the final communication with Deeper that you had?
The final communication we had was through the department. So we would have issued them the new updated CBA, and we didn't hear any other comment beyond that point.
So in February, the department, and did the department say that Deeper were happy, or did they say?
My understanding of how it works, if they were unhappy, we would have heard about it.
You never know with Department of Deeper. But,
Again, I have no experience.
were you surprised when this went public a few weeks ago that the Secretary General has taken a very strong position in internal communications and government? The memo for government is not a small thing to raise such major concerns, unprecedented almost, in my experience as a minister. Were you surprised at that level of criticism?
I think it's probably a fair comment to say we were surprised, Deputy. But as I said, we're very confident. We stand over our work. We've gone through a very thorough process.
Okay. Can I ask a couple of just questions on some of the details, because it's the first time getting the details. The assessment there, Simon Smith, I think, was saying that, or was it that there was €500 per household gain from the likes of being able to do motor tax quickly or e-government. That's 500 over 25 years, is it? Or
500 per annum.
per annum. And is that based on, you said there that is that based on the calculation you said that on average we're all on the internet for 8.7 hours per week?
Per week.
And is 25% of that is productive?
Time.
I wish mine was 25% productive. And then do you multiply an average
Yes, then you multiply
wage
it.
or an average industrial wage? Or?
Yeah, so you multiply it, and I suppose over 25 years it ends up being a significant number.
It's a massive number, isn't it?
Yes, it is significant, yes.
In that calculation, what account do you take that some of that 25% of productive activity during your motor tax you could still do on a 3G or 4G or certainly a 5G system coming?
Yeah. So effectively that's the counterfactual. So we have taken another haircut of 12% off the benefits to reflect that some of those activities you could do with your existing service.
12% of
12%.
that, so it would have been €600 or whatever.
Yeah,
or
yeah, so it's off you take it off the bottom, effectively, once you've discounted it back, so it's a 12% reduction in the output.
How do you assess 12%? Like doing my motor tax, I can do my motor tax on 3G here versus, where do you get the 12% figure?
It's a technical calculation that was done between the technical experts and our colleagues in Netherlands who would be used to doing assessments of what will happen with broadband over the next 25 years, and trying to come up with a calculation based on the advice from the technical team.
As PwC brought in Netherlands.
Correct.
Yeah. On the you said as well that there's €120 annual saving from shopping online.
Correct.
What is that saving?
So that's the fact.
Is that per household as well? It is?
Per household, yes. In the intervention area we're talking about here. So
what's the saving?
So we assume that by virtue of, I suppose, how people purchase how they purchase activity nowadays is completely different. And I suppose you're looking at a broad, instead of having a very limited number of places to go to purchase some type of merchandise, you have a whole, I suppose, gallery of places that you can look for things, and by virtue of that, there's studies that say the kind of savings that you would expect from online shopping would be more material. So we have that space. Our original calculation is that it would have been 600 per household in the intervention area, but we apply, as you say, an 80% haircut to that to reflect the fact that a significant number of that you could do with your existing service. So that means that it's only 120 that we've reflected in the model over the 25-year period for the benefits.
I have 4 teenagers.
Yes.
I don't know if you've ever seen 4 teenagers in action in online shopping. There's no saving in our household. I kid you not. And I'm told it's not. They're not unusual. Is there not a potential increase in expenditure that would occur from being on having all those?
That's based on empirical research that there is a saving from online shopping, and there's a lot of research out there that says that.
A saving because
it's access to a greater number of greater type of merchandise.
So you get a lower price.
Correct.
How do you factor in the displacement factor there that our own internal economy is collapsing, retail economy, and you talk to any high street, in the displacement areas particularly, these market towns, they're dying because we're all online shopping and local retailers are dead. How was that calculation taken into account at all? That's all coming from Manchester in a parcel now. No one buys anything locally.
Obviously, displacement takes account of that, and that's what you're trying to apply to say that obviously. But we're talking about this project. We're not talking about anything else. We're talking about what's the benefits to society of this particular investment.
And what was the displacement factor you took into account when it came to online shopping? Sorry, I'd missed that. Or
in relation to that, it was 12%.
again?
Yes.
It seems a bit random in terms that it's 12% in both places.
Again, it's based on research, so these are, detailed models are done in order to calculate what kind of percentage is reasonable, and it's based on technical advice as well.
Okay. I know you don't, the cost side was KPMG and so on, but you presented in the documents we have today the copy of the April, which I presume was the one that was agreed after February, after
Correct.
all this.
Yeah.
And just to look at the cost side, without where you present the total cost is 1922 for the cost of the state, 974 cost of the operator, and then the net position is 858. What is the net position, or what does that mean, or what is it?
So effectively, it's the benefits less the cost, and the cost is the 2. So your total benefits is 3.7 less the cost of the state, less the cost of the operator is the net. So that's what gives you the positive CBR, because it's the positive benefit versus the total costs.
Okay. And do those figures include VAT, or do they?
Correct, yes.
Yeah. So that's the actual net. I understand that now. I mean, there is, Deputy Stanley says there are other costs. There's the cost of the department are going to have to be funded for 25 years.
Again,
that's not included in those.
No, this is purely for the investment to do with the National Broadband Plan. From an infrastructure point of view, it's not about the other ancillary costs relating to it.
That would take a quarter more, a third of it, whatever. Yeah.
Again, I'm not aware of what the detailed costs are, but yes, you're correct.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank you all for coming before us this afternoon. The committee stands adjourned until 2 p.m. on the 18th of June 2019. Thank you.